So we're here to talk, we can boil it down to one word, really budget, I guess, in terms of what the fiscal policy, what the budget outlook looks like for the state. As I think Mindy or somebody mentioned, the audience may have a mix of some real expertise in the state's budget. Others may not have a lot of knowledge about the state's budget. And again, we have two real experts here. You have the chair of the Ways and Means. How do we come up with the money, and then how do we execute on the spending policies? And then somebody who represents the Appropriations Committee. Also, Mindy mentioned there were a lot of folks who were asking, well, what's happening with the federal budget? That's sort of the big unknown. And we can either postpone that and come back to it or talk about it now. As Mindy mentioned, I worked for 22 years for Congressman Steny Hoyer, so I got a lot of exposure on the federal side. And enough to know that I can report everything is just fine in Washington. Very quiet. Budget situation is perfect. The fact that the government has collapsed in France, we have two wars going on currently in the world. That's right, we had a presidential election, big transition coming up. So there is a lot happening at the federal, on the federal side, and it is definitely going to impact the 90 days that you're getting ready to go through starting in January for the state of Maryland. There are a lot of unknowns. All three of us still sit on the Spending Affordability Committee. I'm the citizen number now, but spending affordability is one of the bodies that the House and Senate members come together, start looking at the state's fiscal outlook. And so we begin to get some picture of what the state budget forecasts are. It is impossible to really accurately predict what the state budget is going to look like. You've heard a lot of the doom and gloom. I will say this very quickly, and that is, when you hear about state budget deficits, for most of the time that I was in the state legislature, just about every year, not every single, but just about every year, they talked about there was a huge structural deficit and the legislature is going to have to find. Most Marylanders believe that we run red ink every year. We do not. By constitutional law, by the state's constitution, the state has to balance their budget every year, and they do that. The difference is when you hear about the structural deficit or the out-year deficit projections, what we're talking about includes what I often refer to as the aspirations of what the state would like to be doing in the next year, in the next several years. Usually we do a 5-year outlook. And in this case, if you look out over the next 5 years, the state has made the commitment policy-wise, we want to invest, and I say we, the state wants to invest a lot more in K through 12 education, and there are some hefty increases coming in terms of state aid to local education agencies for education. In fact, a 41% increase is projected. That's a lot of state spending that is projected. Now, whether they're going to be able to do that or not, you're going to hear more about that from these two. It's going to be up to them to help figure that out, whether we can do that. But that's an aspiration that the state has. It's just like you all might or might not have this, a Christmas list. Here's what I'd like to have for Christmas, but here's what the budget really affords me to have for this year's Christmas. So that's really what they're getting ready to go through. And they go through, unlike the U.S. Congress, they go through a 90-day rigorous process where they do come out at the end, usually, with a balanced operating and capital budget. And again, they're going to have the difficult task of going through that. We'll try to answer whatever questions we can. Just very quickly on very quickly for the fourth time, the federal budget. You mentioned folks are wondering about the Key Bridge, wondering about the FBI, some of the other things. Look, no doubt Maryland is a very blue state, and the nation just elected a very red president. We are not on the most favored list for President-elect Trump. And I will say this, FBI, I don't know. I wouldn't want to put any stock in that right now, that it will eventually move to Maryland, which we were fully anticipating and hoping. But Trump has made it pretty clear he's not in favor of that. Whether he leaves it downtown in the crumbling building they're in or not, who knows? We'll see. The Key Bridge, though. We have felt pretty comfortable that funding for the Key Bridge will stay intact for this reason. There were some natural disasters around the country that did a lot of damage to southern states, a lot of red states, and even out in the western parts of the country. And therefore, there is an emergency funding package that is going to have to move through to do repairs in places like Florida and other southern states. And for that reason, you will end up with, at least my prediction, some kind of bipartisan package that includes funding for all those projects. And the commitment that President Biden made to fully have the federal government pay for the replacement of the Key Bridge, I think, will eventually get done. So with that, again, everything beyond that is flip a coin. It's hard to say what the impact is going to be on the almost 200,000 state employees that we have who live in Maryland. What kind of impact all that has. There's a lot of talk about, downsizing a lot of those agencies. That will have a real impact on us. Even moving some state agencies out of the district, the DMV area, district, Maryland and Virginia. So we'll see, and have to try to answer more questions on the federal side. But at the local side, a lot of that is really going to be driven, I think, by what these two legislators and the rest of the General Assembly does in the coming 90 days, along with the governor as the partner. The governor is going to set the tone. He'll introduce the budget, and he would be the first to tell you, and I'm sure if you heard him at lunch, he talked about the fiscal challenges. But we're going to get through them. With that, let me turn it over to the two of you for a quick comments, then I'll have a question or two for you. I'm just saying, either one of you can start.
Okay, so one, thank you to TEDCO for having us here today. I appreciate it. This is my kind of conference where they're passing out wine during the session, and I appreciate that.
We didn't get any out here. Water up here.
So, as was mentioned, I'm Chair Vanessa Atterbeary, born and raised in Howard County, and I think I was appointed in 2020 to chair the Ways and Means Committee. Prior to that, I served 7 years on judiciary, so it was a completely new subject matter for me. But as John mentioned, I'm very passionate about education. I was prior to kids, but now I think even more so to kids. And so a couple of preliminary comments based on what he said in terms of what's going to happen with the federal government. I mean, that is all speculation. You all know that the federal government is the biggest employer for the state of Maryland. So in terms of what we do in the General Assembly in the Ways and Means Committee, we have to figure out where revenue is going to come from. And so right now, as it stands, Maryland is fine where we are, where our budget is. But when we start to look at 2028 and beyond, we have serious problems coming. And I don't think it's alarming to say that we would go off a cliff. And so we have to start planning for that. And that is in large part the investment that we have made in education. And I was just with Chair Barnes yesterday on Appropriations, so I'm comfortable in saying that he and I are on the same page, and I'm sure Delegate Smith is too, that we are not backing off from the blueprint right now as it stands from the House side. We have to figure out where the money is going to come from and keep our commitment to our kids. Now, does that mean at some point we might have to extend some timelines about what is going to happen in the blueprint? Perhaps. But as it stands right now, we are not willing to make cuts to the blueprint until we know quite frankly, what the governor, what his outlook is, where he wants to go, and how he wants to lead in continuing the blueprint and generating revenue. So a loss of federal jobs and closing down agencies in the state of Maryland means a loss of income tax and revenue, and that would be incredibly detrimental to the state of Maryland. And so our spending essentially is surpassing what we're bringing in. And so how do we fix that? We have to either cut our spending. So are we cutting education? Are we cutting mental health? Are we cutting transportation? I'm sure all of you can name 5 things that are important to you that you wouldn't want cut. So are we going to cut spending? Are we going to increase our revenue? Nobody wants their taxes increased, whether you're an individual, whether you're a business. And so, or are we going to do some combination of the both? And that's what we have to figure out. Last session, the House really dug in. The Ways and Means Committee, the Appropriations Committee, and the Environment and Transportation Committee that's chaired by Mark Poorman from Montgomery County. And we really put a package together, to be perfectly honest, where we thought we would not be in this predicament. But the Senate did not go for it. And so they only took some of what we said we wanted to do, which is fine, but it was kind of a cut and patch job that's not going to get us through the long term. So without a doubt, we have 2 more sessions left in this term. We're going to have to make some really tough decisions, and from that standpoint, it's going to be difficult. And with that, I think I'll pass it off to Delegate Smith.
First, I want to say thank you again to TEDCO for the invitation. Thank you for powering through your cocktails. To stay that very hard. You're looking hard. I see you all. And I also just want to say it's an honor to serve with Chairwoman Atterbeary, because when you think about the importance of education in the abstract, people go, yeah, we should educate everyone well. Yes. But I think it's a really unique moment in the Maryland General Assembly to have the chair of Ways and Means and the chair of Appropriations and the chair of Education and Economic Development Subcommittee all have expelled children, school-age children, at the same time. I don't know if that type of skin in the game has always been present as people were considering some of these issues. And I think that is what makes Chairman Atterbeary even a better position to discuss this, not just abstract issue. This is real, And so, for me, just to kind of paint the picture, we all sit on the Spending Affordability Committee. And so in the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, the Spending Affordability Committee basically said, we only have enough revenue to cover about 87 to 89% of our budget. And that was during the Great Recession. And now on the projections for 2030 is that we would have only enough resources to cover 84% of our budget. So this is more grave than even the forecast that we've received, during the Great Recession. So that's a sobering, kind of reality. I want to tell you on the good news, because I think we know some of the variables are unclear, particularly on the federal front, right? But in terms of what is more in our control as a state is that we have agencies that sometimes have undersubscribed or completely ignored line items that are supposed to generally go to very worthy causes, but either localities don't tap those funds or businesses don't apply for them. And so some of those dormant funds might be opportunities for shifts. I know we are often talking about new revenue and also cuts when necessary, but we also need to be, nuanced and surgical to see where's money just kind of stale and not doing anything for anyone. And so because I receive the budgets for the Department of Commerce and Department of Labor, and those concerns are really important, but we've already seen there are some funds that aren't really moving and haven't moved for half a decade. Those are opportunities to reprogram or redirect them to places to ensure that we're not losing ground with our economic development goals. Another thing in terms of education, one of the biggest drivers of our deficit isn't simply the blueprint for Maryland's future, which is really important, but it's also our commitments to make childcare more affordable. We're one of, I believe, 20 or so states where, our average annual childcare costs are actually eclipsing in-state tuition out of public college, right? And so when you look at the fact that the 2 biggest barriers to being a reliable employee is transportation and childcare, it was not just a value proposition like this is our values to help people with childcare. It also helps people to be reliable taxpayers because they're going to work every day because someone is safely taking care of their child. And so there had been a childcare scholarship program that was under-enrolled, but when we made some policy fixes to enable people to be not only eligible more quickly, but process quickly, let's be frank, no one's ever accused the government of being a really great marketer or really good advertiser, but if something's actually working from a government, people just spread the word, you know what I mean? Because people spread when something's working well. And so we have enjoyed a lot of, increase in accessing that program. And that's good for workers, particularly for women in the workforce. But it has created some new deficits that we're going to have to figure out how to close. But limiting the ability for someone to be valuable in the workforce would be working against our purposes if we're concerned about revenue, income taxes, and so forth. So I think we're going to have all options on the table, as the chairwoman cited, because there are a lot of things we don't know from the federal side, but we're just going to be surgical from the state side at looking at where's the money dormant, where is a program that has an implementation date that we had sooner, could that be pushed out, as she mentioned earlier. I think what's really important for you all to know is that there's no way we're going to be competitive and creating an ecosystem for entrepreneurship, particularly in the tech space, if we do not have a properly educated electorate workforce for you to partner with and for you to deploy. So I think that we're all united in the sense that while Maryland is proud to have a disproportionately highly educated workforce, there's still serious gaps that we need to continue to shore up to remain competitive. And I did not mention it earlier, but I am a native born Virginian. And so one of my best ways to get Marylanders to do things is to say that Virginia's doing it better.
All right. I asked the two legislators if it would be all right if we, as they took questions as we went along, and they said that's fine. So at this point, the line's probably city might see through, so you might want to raise your hand if you have any questions right as we go along.
I can start off. I'm Arnie Satanan. I used to be a TEDCO, and John used to be thank you, John, for serving on the board for TEDCO all these years. But you all talked about increasing income. Income is going to become so much more important for Maryland, since Maryland has prided herself on the fact that we have a stable economy, partly because of the federal government. And now that that's becoming an issue, or we anticipate it becoming an issue, and then we can all agree that probably going to be an issue, how do we increase income for Maryland and not allow for an exodus of population from Maryland, highly educated population, to move out of the state because of losing these opportunities that they were all get up?
It's a great question. If I could add, one of the challenges that the governor is facing currently is, if you look at the revenues and where we are underperforming, that's the principal driver for the state's general fund. It's personal income that really provides most of the funding that we need to do these programs. So I'll throw it to the two of you. What do you see the governor doing that the legislature is going to be supportive of, and or maybe the governor needs to do a little bit more of in terms of supporting exactly what we're talking about, which is how do we keep personal income increasing? How do we maintain the kind of growth that we need for the economy in order to stay competitive, not only within the government but also within the private sector, obviously?
So I think the question was, what do we see the governor doing or supporting?
I added on to...
Yeah, I don't know.
What do we do that either supports the governor or that you might like to see the governor do more of as he presents the budget and promotes policies in the upcoming session?
So I'll take that a couple parts and just answer it as best I can, because a lot of this is just unknown, to be honest. So first of all, like was already mentioned, if we lose federal government jobs, we're going to have a significant drop in personal income and the taxes that come from that. And I'm not sure what we'll do to replace that net. What the governor is going to do, we would like to see that. As chairs of the Appropriations and Ways and Means, we would like to know what is his plan, and hopefully we can work, as partners. Because quite frankly, just because we're all in the same party doesn't we all agree all the time. But he needs to take the lead. Last year, the House took the lead on this issue. And so he needs to take the lead, the Senate needs to step up, and we can all see where we land. So I don't know what his plan is as I sit here right now. But we're starting to have these conversations. I know their staff is starting to have these conversations. He and I will sit down. I think he's already sat down with Chair Barnes before session, and we will see. I was just telling someone in the hallway last year at this time, we had a much clearer idea of where everybody was, but everyone was so caught up in this election and was really focused on that. Now people are really just starting to focus on Annapolis. So that's kind of an answer, but not an answer.
So again, as the chairwoman said, we can presume what the governor, would want to do, but I do want to look up something else, a little bit of a doubter, but we often talk about the potential for federal jobs to be lost. And I think sometimes we forget about just federal research dollars, get out in Baltimore, and obviously Johns Hopkins has been a leader for a very long time in accessing federal research dollars. And so what that could mean for our economy is another, attendant consequence of like the change could be, and the skepticism around research and the value of that research, right? That there could be divestments, from the federal government there. So I think that in some ways you're going to have to bring maybe unlikely stakeholders together and really have conversations and convenings around our mutual needs and how we need to maybe we don't want to fall into like class warfare and other things that pit folks together, because there's no viable economy that doesn't have some level of like mutuality, right? If I own a business, I need my employees to be reliable, show up, perform, and execute. If I'm a worker, I need to make enough to cover my basis. And if I want to grow my economy, your local and state governments might have to have some creative bonding around how they're funding projects and different things that they traditionally were looking for the federal government to take the lead on. And so I think that there are going to have to be some unique local and state and private sector partnerships around projects, not just infrastructure projects, but maybe even, for example, when you think about the last mile for transportation, for people who end up having that gap between the last bus stop or light rail stop, there might need to be that local government / matron employer, maybe a shuttle. Like these are things that might be short-term things that alleviate the gaps in funding we might not get for the next 4 years, but it can help move people and workers and stuff. So that's just like a transportation example. But there could be other projects where we're going to have to think of what's a short-term, kind of solution. It's not going to be the long-term solution, but it allows us to continue to grow businesses and to allow people to stay kind of, viable in the ecosystem. Now, the good news, I think, for us as members of the House of Delegates is that the budget begins in one chamber or the other every year. Last year, the budget was started in the Senate. This year, the budget is started in the House. So that means the chamber that I think was really proactive last year but received the budget secondary, we will be on first. And I think that having that opportunity to shape the conversation will be important for not only us as members of the House, but for this larger conversation, because we really need to think about this session being the session that we solve some long-term problems for the next 3 to 4 years. And we can't be back here next year having the same conversation. We're going to have to take bigger picture.
Sure.
I just want to put some numbers on this federal. I have my sheet. I'm a little too old to have it on my phone. I need to look at it. So in Maryland, we have 160,000 civilian federal jobs located in Maryland. Their wages total about $25 billion. D.C. and Virginia combined have about 190,000 federal jobs, and some Marylanders go there. Our 2025 budget, fiscal budget, included, we haven't talked about this yet, not just income, but aid that we get from the federal government. So our 2025 budget includes $19 billion of federal dollars. So there's also a question of booming, what do we do if we don't get all of that aid? And so a lot of our job next session is going to be trying to play a guessing game, and what do we do if some of these things happen? How would we combat that?
I will give a quick but shameless plug to TEDCO. And also,
Because Roy just walked in.
let me tell you, TEDCO has grown significantly over the years. And I'll go back to the time when I was in the legislature. TEDCO was just sort of sitting there and really smothered by back then it was the Department of Business and Economic Development. Today is Department of Commerce. And it was the House that took the lead and really broke it out and sort of allowed it to flourish and begin to establish some of the programs that hopefully all of you are benefiting from or at least knowledgeable of. And in terms of how do you, getting to your question, how do we really begin to grow the economy and to provide economic development? In the state we are blessed with a well-educated workforce, a lot of technology, a lot of compliments of the federal government, as we talk about, and technology and economic development. Who's the agency who's best poised to do that? It's TEDCO. And TEDCO is by design allowed to have the freedom and some autonomy to do that with all the, I don't want to say hindrances, but without the layers of bureaucracy that you find in some of the larger agencies. We have a dynamic leader. Oh, I see Troy. Troy is in the room. Troy Stovall is a tremendous leader of this organization. But it really is, it takes the support of legislators like these two. And they've been very supportive of this agency. And I think, working with the governor, I think this governor understands the importance of an organization like TEDCO. So making sure you let all of your elected officials know the importance of the work that TEDCO is doing, I think, is just critical. I'm not sure who got their hand up first, but we'll go with you on the front. Question.
So this question will be a little layered. I'm a tech founder myself. I'm a TEDCO portfolio company. I work with the network of Black tech founders, and there's an issue that we're really focused on. Black people are 30% of the population in Medellin, all 7% of employer firms. Women are 51% of the population. We own 30% of employer firms. That was in the TEDCO report a couple of years ago. When you think about economic development strategy, you have full attack on like DEI, et cetera, and clearly a need to grow more businesses led by people of color and women as an economic development strategy to grow revenue, et cetera. And so I understand the governor will have a budget. I like to understand what is the General Assembly, what are you all thinking about in terms of policy or budgetary things that you can do to help facilitate that kind of equitable growth as a strategy to whether it's deal with what's happening at the federal level or just as an approach for the airline that just makes sense.
So one of the things we have done, and I was happy to work with TEDCO on this, in 2023 we passed legislation at Protect Growth Fund. And so I think the winners were just announced this morning, Mindy said. And so from 2025, I think it's to 2033, there was $5 billion appropriated each year in the budget for minority companies in the tech space to get grants to grow in that environment, to grow in that ecosystem, and to get that type of support. So it's those types of things that we work closely, specifically with TEDCO with. I know Commerce is doing some great things, but I think, to your point, if you look at the leadership in the General Assembly now, we are focused on those things. I mean, if I'm just going to be blunt about it, we have an African-American Speaker of the House who is a woman, first time ever. We've never had well, for years, Chair Davis, my good friend, who is now our state treasurer, chaired economic matters. He was replaced by C.T. Wilson from Southern Maryland, who's African American. I'm an African American female. We have multiple African American female vice chairs. I mean, so I think now in the forefront of what we are trying to do in the General Assembly is to create those opportunities, and the challenge is where we are in our what we're doing, where we are in our fiscal environment, right? So, you know, we might have wanted $20 million every year in the governor's budget for the next 10 years, but we couldn't get that, right? So we're trying to each year kind of work in this space and grow the space.
So I wanted to piggyback on it because there's two things. There's the actual money, because we all know that founders need access to capital, right? So there's what of the funding piece that Chairwoman spoke to. But I also think there's just sometimes leadership. The soft leadership is not always about a law. So, for example, Black Tech Week, we were trying to woo that to Baltimore. We were so close to wooing them. I saw, Secretary Anderson in action. I was part of the pinch. But Ohio saw that they were probably about to go, and they threw that money down. And so that's a signal that we are in a challenging and unpredictable time. But I also believe that we are now more positioned to advocate for how we could be a great location for you. Maybe you're from a wonderful blue city in a very red state that doesn't really care about what you're doing, right? Maryland could be positioning not only its business community, but its higher education community to be a destination, not just for learning, but for living afterwards. I'm an alumnus who heard up to HBCUs. Many HBCUs are in very challenging states, quite frankly. I mean, I hate to steal from our good friends in other places, but I feel like Maryland should say, this is a place where you can live authentically. You can build your business. The values for your workers will be honored here. And I think we have to be really bullish and not, we shouldn't hold back on it. We shouldn't tiptoe and whisper about it. If other people are putting down a flag that everyone can't feel comfortable in the state, then Maryland has to say this is a state that not only values educated workers, values tech, values this, but we are going to figure out how we could partner and make this a valuable place for you to put your stakes down. I know that HBCUs in Maryland are uniquely all public institutions. I went to 2 private HBCUs. That's what makes HBCUs in Maryland really unique. They're all public. And so when you think about the HBCU funding settlement, and then you also see the program approval process, there is a focus on how can we get more collaboration between our HBCU community and some of our TWIs to ensure that we have tech opportunities that are like bursting not only at College Park, Newshata, and Chirps in the room, but I think our whole University of Maryland system needs to see that support in standing up businesses. And so I'm excited that our higher education community and our business community, they could be speaking in one voice, particularly to entrepreneurs, the tech entrepreneurs of color and Black folks specifically, that this is a place that welcomes you in your fullness. And I think Maryland should be really proud of that and not shy away from talking about that.
Yes, sir.
Well, just along those lines, I think the delegate was sort of presenting the conundrum we face in the budget as sort of a binary choice between, taxes and cutting spending. But there's a third approach, which is apt for the context that we're at, and that is to grow the economic case in Maryland. To stop, I'm from Montgomery County, I have a lifetime resident of Montgomery County. We are a company town, in a sense, and that company is downsizing one way or another, and there's a tsunami on its way, it seems to me, and I think that the leaders not only need to recognize the problem, but I think we need to make sure that those funds are deployed in programs that have proven effectiveness. And I would urge, because over the years I spent a lot of time in Annapolis. I was the architect many years ago, so they call it the Maryland Biotechnology Investor Tax Credit Program. I conceived of it. I led the legislative effort to get it passed over opposition from then Maryland Department of Business and Economic Development. It turns out in hindsight it's been an extremely effective program. My one plea to the delegation is that really when it comes down to it, please listen to the entrepreneurs, listen to the people that sign the fronted checks, because we tend to know what's not every program, not everything that the states are offering necessarily effective. with what's coming, you can't afford to get it wrong. We don't have a lot of time left, and you need to make sure that the programs, the economic development programs, really lead to growth.
For the benefit of everybody, you said a one-horse, the one company town. Describe, what is that?
We're governed. By and large. So if you look at the economy of Montgomery County, either first degree or secondary, you either work for the government, you work for a government contractor, or you work for a service provider. That service driven by one of those obviously various sections. So generally, that's been our economy, and that's going to change to some extent. We all know that.
Great. Comments?
Yeah, so I would just say a couple of things. Thank you for the work you've done in the past. I don't think you and I have ever met, but I had 3 solutions, and my third was a combination of both, of possibly cutting spending, right, up as a possibility, and raising revenue. And I think that's probably somewhere where we're going to have to land, and that's going to be a hard choice. And when I became, I think it was 3 years ago, I can't remember, when I became chair of Ways and Means, I have an interesting perspective because I grew up with a mother who's a public school teacher and my father who was an entrepreneur. And what I told the he's been in this since 81. And what I told the speaker was, look, we have, since I've been in the House, there's been always this, it's like businesses versus everybody or everybody versus businesses, and that's not how it should be, right? Because wider businesses to come here, and the governor has expressed since he's been elected, since he's been the governor, he wants to bring businesses here. He wants to steal them from other states and say, you should come to Maryland. And I think that's great, and I think that's what we need to do too. I think we need to support the businesses here, but we have to continue to make it a great place to live. We have to provide great services so your kids can go to great schools. We have to have excellent services in the communities. And, that's up to the localities to figure out how to pay for that, and that's also up to us to figure out how to pay for that. So and I see it as a coexistence. And one of the things that I did start to do 2 years ago is I have DLS, the Department of Legislative Services, looking at all the things that all the workforce programs that we have, all of the tax credits that we have. So we can kind of say, what are we doing? What's working? What's a pot of money that's just sitting there and we're not using it? Can we repurpose it? So we are kind of going through that inventory process right now.
I just want to add that when you think about what's being proposed, and it's all vague, right, about what will happen with the federal government, I can't say there's a proposal, but there's obviously a feeling and there's some rhetoric that does not sound hopeful. Because I grew up in a Navy town, the Brock realignment was something that there were cities that lost bases, right? And that was a fundamental reimagining of what their local economies were going to be, right? So there is a little bit of a blueprint for parts of our country that found something that really shaped the foundation of everyone's careers and lifestyles going away. What lessons can we learn from some of those places? Because when you lose a base, you lose not only people that are highly educated and highly skilled, you have people across the skills continuum, right? From entry level all the way up. And so I think in some ways, Maryland and on this region in particular, we might need to think about what long-term life looks like if you cannot always look at the federal government as kind of the nugget from which you spawn everything else. And that's going to be, I think, it's going to be an intellectual and emotional journey for people that largely go, if I can get federal research dollars, if I can get federal this, that tends to be the beginning of the funding layers that many people think about when they're thinking about business expansion in this region. And so I do think that we're going to have to start, I think about the Richmond branch of the Federal Reserve, which is around the corner, right? How can these some other financial tools and convening entities to help us bring some people together around capital stacks that are always fully dependent on federal support?
We had one more question, and I know we're over time, but you had, if it's quick, we'll go ahead and do it. Since we serve wine, we'll go ahead and validate.
Hi, I'm a local entrepreneur at Tech. Decided to be at Baltimore and Tech after 20 plus years in corporate. My question is, how can we, small businesses, how can you work this out? What's we say?
I will say, speaking for myself, I approach what we do different than a lot of my colleagues. I don't know everything. I want to hear from you. I welcome you coming and sitting down with me and going over whatever the topic is as a 101 and saying, this is why this doesn't work, or this is why we should be doing this. I appreciate that. So I do that, we cover gaming, election, on lots of things. I do that with a lot of people. If you just reach out to my office, I'm happy to make time and have those conversations.
And I think that's the beauty of local and state government. I used to be a federal lobbyist, and those people seem so far away and they're not attainable. But people DM me on social media and like, can we meet up? And I meet them. So, because I really do manage my own social media, some of that. So take us up on that. Like, that might seem like not real, but it's real. Like, you can really meet with us. You can meet for coffee or whatever. It doesn't matter. I live like 7 minutes from here. So, we're easy to find, and we're happy to meet because, to her point, I don't know everything, and I'm very comfortable with that. I always say, to me, I'm concerned about a leader that doesn't ask questions, because to me, that's either a sign of a lack of curiosity or you're too insecure to admit you don't know something. And I'd have none of those problems, so I'm happy to meet anyway.
Yeah. When companies would come in, at CEOs often would come in and meet with Congressman Warrior, they'd say, what should we be doing? His advice to them was always, get to know me, and let's get to know one another before your hair is on fire, before you have an emergency. That way there's a trust built up already. Have a friend before you need a friend. And with that, I think we owe a great round of applause to Superstar